Good morning and welcome, everyone. I call to order the Thursday, August 17th, 2023 Kansas Corporation Commission Business Meeting to order. I'm Susan Duffy. I serve as chair of the commission. I'm joined by Commissioner Keene and Commissioner French. On today's agenda, we have 43 consent items and one discussion item. Commissioners, you've had the opportunity to read, review, and study the consent agenda. Are there any questions or comments? And I will start with Commissioner Keene.
None for me, thank you.
And Commissioner French.
No questions. I move approval of the consent agenda.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor, please vote aye.
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 Aye. The motion passes. Thank you. Our next item on the agenda is our SPP quarterly update. And this is with Sherry Feist Albrecht, and she is with us today. And already the screen is loading up with your update. Good morning, Sherry.
Good morning, commissioners. I hope I have got this going. I'll get going here. I'm here today to provide you the quarterly update from the recent round of SPP Regional State Committee and Board of Directors meetings held at towards the end of July. I'll advance the next slide, I hope. So let's go there. Okay. The quarterly meetings were held July 24th and July 25th, 2023 in St. Paul, Minnesota. The Regional State Committee meeting, as usually does, had an educational session in the morning, the business meeting in the afternoon, followed by a joint stakeholder meeting, which board members and members committee members also attend. And that is designed to share information to both groups, the Regional State Committee as well as the Board of Directors Committee, in the most efficient manner possible. Let's see. For the RSC meeting, we had several voting items. One was an officer vacancy. We had a vacancy created by the departure of Jerry Huser from the Iowa Utilities Board in the vice president slot. The RSC elected Will McAdams, commissioner from Texas, to serve in that role for the remainder of this year, and elected John Tuma, from the commissioner from Minnesota, to fill the secretary treasurer slot vacated by Will McAdams in his promotion to vice president. The RSC also had elected a nominating committee to come up with a slate of officers for the 2024 RSC year. That committee chair is Christy Fegan, and Todd Hyatt from Oklahoma and Justin Tate from Arkansas will fill out that committee. Christy Fegan, as you remember, is from South Dakota. The RSC also approved its budget, 2024 budget. It did increase from $424,500 to $481,000 for the 2024 year. That includes 3 in-person meetings, and then also the RSC approved the audit report. There were no findings in that audit report.
So that $481,000, what is that the budget for?
That basically covers the RSC commissioners and COG members' travel expenses for attending various meetings, whether they are COG meetings that are scheduled to be in person, or whether they are quarterly meetings for the RSC members.
Okay, thank you.
And Sherry, I think we usually have about 150,000 within that for consulting services, which we historically have not used recently, but that's within that number, right?
That is correct. The other 2 items for the agenda were very substantive voting items. I have additional slides dedicated to them. I'll just briefly mention them here. One of them is revision request 549, which is establishing a winter resource adequacy requirement. And then the other item is what's referred to as the HIT M1 congestion hedging matter. The RSC business meeting also had reports of the second quarter 2023 financials. $147,937 remains in the 2023 RSC budget. So they're in good shape with one meeting left, one October meeting left. And then the cost allocation group work group report is one which the president of the cost allocation working group typically does to provide RSC a synopsis, a summary of the events that have taken place since the last quarterly meeting. And that included matters such as the HIT C2, the sunflower waiver application, HIT M1 congestion hedging, the revision request 549, and an ongoing review that the COG is conducting related to safe harbor provisions in the tariff. The revision request 549, the winter resource adequacy requirement. Currently, the SPP tariff has a winter resource adequacy requirement for the summer season. This would implement a similar resource adequacy requirement for the winter season. So with this revision, the tariff would apply the same level of validation, study, and assessment requirements to both the summer and the winter seasons. With its adoption, the RR would propose to implement, the implementation would start with the 2024-2025 winter season. And the current construct with summer season only really has a deficiency payment that only applies to the summer season. So with this addition of a winter season and a construct of an annual deficiency payment, this revision request also provides for deficiency payments to reflect either winter or summer season deficiencies or the higher thereof, and provides an alternative also for deficiency payments to prevent duplicate payments for the same capacity within an annual time frame. The cost allocation work group approved revision request 549 unanimously. I believe we had that vote in May. Following the May COG vote, this matter has been the subject of much discussion, and a couple of weeks before the July round of quarterly meetings, the Markets and Operations Policy Committee reviewed the status of the revision request and offered up some additional language to assert one portion of the revision request, which relates to the planning reserve margin. You'll see it on the slide here as highlighted in that kind of light green at the bottom. The request was for SPP to provide the detailed methodology used to conduct the loss of load expectation studies, as well as the methodology it was using to determine the final planning reserve margin value based on those study results. There was also language inserted to request that SPP provide stakeholders the study assumptions and the data required to conduct the studies, the LOLE studies, with sufficient detail that the stakeholders could replicate the transmission provider results, SPP's results. That passed MOPSI. That was a change to the revision request languages that had gone through other stakeholder groups. It came to, and the market monitoring unit at SPP also had some current concerns regarding this revision request, and they're supportive, highly supportive of the winter season resource adequacy report, but they're concerned that there are some gaps that would perhaps provide, if those gaps were filled, would provide more I apologize. I did not mean to do that. Let's see if I can go back a slide. To provide appropriate incentives for that winter season requirement. There was a concern that the MMU expressed regarding the reasonable expectation of availability for resources to be used towards that resource adequacy requirement. And they were concerned also that the deficiency calculation wouldn't send the appropriate signal to improve the availability of accredited capacity. With regard to the reasonable expectation of availability, the MMU's concern was that if there is no standard for availability in that revision request, there's a potential gaming opportunity to accredit the resources with the highest unforced capacity factor, regardless of any expectation of their availability. As to further, the accredited capacity without that standard of availability would create a reliability risk for the system. Regarding their concerns about the deficiency calculation, the deficiency payment amount is based on the greater deficiency charge of the two seasons, winter and summer, which would potentially ignore the severity of a seasonal event and could result in different deficiency rates for similar shortages. So those were the concerns they had regarding this, as primarily based on the incentives for making sure that these resources are available, that capacity will be available when it's needed. And their recommendation to the RSC was to remand this revision request to the working groups, primarily would be SOG and the secondary groups for to further address its concerns.
But if we do that, Sherry, how can this be ready for the 23-24 winter season if they remand this back to the committee? I mean, I do believe these two bullets are extremely important, and it sounds like kind of a house of cards if you don't have language in there. And I mean, maybe it's cumulative on, or, you know, there's certain other penalties added for improving your capacity. But if they remand it back, will it still be effective this season?
That was the concern of the RSC as well. And I'll move to the next slide.
I think maybe I have a little commentary on that, because you'll see we didn't end up adopting the MMU's recommendations, and I want to maybe explain the color around that. If you could go back to that slide, Sherry.
Sure.
I think, Commissioner Duffy, what you're saying is generally you've captured a lot of it. I don't think there's a lot of disagreement that these are valid concerns that the MMU has. I think the way that I would frame it, and I think the way that SPP staff and the RSC and most stakeholders frankly saw it, was these are valid concerns, but they're not really concerns with RR 549. They're concerns with the construct as it exists today. There are things we need to fix, whether or not we add the winter resource adequacy piece. And so, you know, I think, yeah, we saw no reason not to go ahead and get the winter season requirement in place, and then we should consider these enhancements on top of it. They weren't really a reason to prevent us from going ahead and taking this step now. I think that was probably the consensus view. Sherry, if you had anything on that, but that was sort of how we viewed it. I think there was some back and forth on whether or not we could get these done before and still have time to get this in place, but we didn't really see much upside to not going ahead and getting the winter resource adequacy requirement in place now and then working on those.
I would agree. I mean, that would have been my concern. You're right. Those two bullets need to be done regardless. So it was approved, correct?
Ultimately, it was approved, and I'll get to that in just a moment. I've got a couple of slides to get to to the final vote to give you some additional color.
Okay,
Since we now have the REAL team, the Resource and Energy Adequacy Leadership Team in place, a lot of the resource adequacy revision requests are going through the REAL team for a vote as well. So when the MOPSI amendment did come before the REAL team, and which went ahead and voted to approve only the first sentence of the MOPSI amendment. And that's, I've highlighted it here with the one slight revision that the REAL team made to that. And this was something that SPP was fully agreeable to doing, and I think has done in the past when they've presented their LOLE studies. I think that methodology it's essentially putting in the tariff the practice that as it exists today. There were concerns with regard to confidential data, and which is why the second sentence of the MOPSI amendment was rejected. So that passed the REAL team on a 9-5 vote, and it went to RSC. RSC voted to approve it with the REAL team's amendment. There were 9 RSC members in favor and 3 RSC members opposed. And I would say that the opposition that existed on in the REAL team and as far as the RSC goes related to concerns about how outage methodology was going to be implemented in determining the winter PRM, which will come out of the 2023 LOLE study, which is expected to be completed by the end of this year, might even have some results in October. But I don't think a PRM is expected to be developed until first quarter of 2024. But there were concerns about how outages were going to be treated and what impacts those might have on PRM. And so that was the primary reason for the opposition. There was a belief that that the outage policy needed to be fully developed and included addressed within this revision request. Ultimately, that concern is an ongoing concern. It's being addressed within the REAL team, ongoing work on outage methodology, working with both the Operating Reliability Working Group and the Supply Adequacy Working Group to fully formulate that methodology, which I think that the desired goal for that's completion is Q1 of 2024. Any other questions on that particular revision request? Okay. I'll move on to the HIT M1 congestion hedging. This is one that I've talked about with you several times over the last several updates. This has been an ongoing process, as you can see here, from 2019. It's been through various working groups, a HIT M1 workshop, congestion hedging, stakeholder meetings through 2022. And so SPP staff ultimately moved to a set of 9 recommendations to improve congestion hedging. And those 9 recommendations had been considered by COG in April, prior to the April RSC meeting. And we had reached unanimous approval for 7 of those 9 recommendations, but we had a tie vote on the first item on the list that you'll see on the next slide, which essentially resulted in failure of that reset recommendation. And then there was a close vote on how to distribute excess auction revenues. At the April RSC meeting, as you may recall, the RSC directed COG to develop and consider modifications to those proposals to see if they're could be any alternatives that would achieve broader support. So, and we were also directed to provide a recommendation to the RSC at its July meeting. So here are those 9 recommendations. And you'll see here that items 2, 3, 4, those were all, those were unanimous. The one up here, you'll see, we're going to continue, the recommendation COG made to the RSC was to continue to work on this particular item. And rather than looking at it from a 10-year reset, which was originally proposed by SPP staff, we're going to be exploring some other options to maybe increase the opportunities so that all participants have an opportunity to receive those LTCR awards. So COG is currently in the process of exploring those. COG's recommendation to the RSC was to go with a particular methodology for the distribution of excess auction revenues. SPP staff had provided one proposal, and we had a stakeholder propose an alternative proposal for our consideration. So the COG ultimately adopted the stakeholder recommendation. Item 6, 7, 8, 9 here all were the subject of unanimous votes from COG. So this is the recommendation that COG made to the RSC. It's just as I have outlined to you with a little bit more specifics. The distribution of excess auction revenues, rather than going into a full-on change with this next award season, which I believe begins June 1st of 2024, it will be implemented in a kind of 50% with the current method and 50% with the new methodology. That new methodology is to only consider the LTCRs, the long-term congestion rights, and the annual auction revenue rights from rounds 1 and 2, and then the monthly auction revenue results from iteration 1 of that process. We recommended that the RSC allow more time to investigate the possibility of providing other awards, to the LTC awards, to all participants. And so that was the recommendation that was made to the RSC. The MMU did weigh in on this set of proposals as well, supporting the COG's decision to continue discussion of the LTCR allocation. But the MMU would have preferred that COG adopt SPP's proposal for item 5, the distribution of excess auction revenues. And the concern was that it considers the value of congestion on firm transmission rights not hedged through the allocation process, and that it would also support round 3 auction revenue rights nominations. And the concern was that the COG approved proposal didn't consider the value of congestion on firm transmission rights not hedged, and that it would benefit participants with non-congested and counterflow firm transmission rights. So that presentation was made to the RSC, and the RSC ultimately voted to approve COG's HIT M1 congestion hedging recommendation, and that vote was unanimous.
Sherry, who makes up the MMU?
Keith Collins is the I don't know if he's called director of the market monitoring unit, but he has a staff. I don't know how large that staff is. He has several staff members that work on various issues with him. I don't know, Commissioner French, do you know what the size of that group is?
They've grown over the last year or so, added some staff members. My feeling is they are probably about the size of like our Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board, maybe a little larger, maybe 5 or 6 people that participate. I don't know if they have administrative staff as well, but I assume they do. But yes, it's Keith Collins and several analysts that work with him and participate in the process. And I would definitely say they probably were more behind the scenes and involved in more market related activities up until maybe a couple of years ago. Sherry, would you say? And it does seem in the last couple of years they are weighing in on more of these revision requests that are coming before different stakeholder groups. It's not no issue with that. It's good to see the engagement, and they are an independent group, so it's always good to get that viewpoint.
And I think that was, I'm not really familiar with them, and it just seems like lately we're hearing from them. I do think that's probably a good add to the conversation. I think they, and it's good to hear they're independent, because I believe they need to be fully independent, but I do think they probably offer a perspective that should be considered. And I'm glad they're involved in the process now, because I think that was a part that was maybe missing or not as prevalent in the past. Maybe I'm wrong, but
No, that is correct. I mean, as Commissioner French said, they have, particularly since Winter Storm Uri, I think I have seen increased activity, and they have had made very good contribution to various working groups on a number of issues, and I expect that they will continue to do so. And it is a voice that I think does need to be heard, and those discussions will continue to the extent that they have raised issues that need to be further addressed.
thank you.
Mm-hmm. I've captured this as a resource adequacy policy update. I guess I could also have captured this as kind of a real team update. But I'll keep it labeled as such for at least this presentation. Next time I'll probably make a more real team update. Part of the reason is the real team is, most of the meetings that we've been having so far have been a lot of education. There has been some action, and I've tried to highlight it as we go. We have started taking votes on some things, but the real team did get divided into some subgroups, which I think I shared with you early on. I don't recall, but there's an operations subgroup. There is a resource adequacy subgroup. There's also a market subgroup. And each subgroup has some key issues assigned to it. And we're in the process of prioritizing some of the ones that we have, the initiatives that we have in front of us. And as SPP is a dynamic system, and the transmission system is dynamic, things are getting added or kind of moved around, and there's significant overlap between some of the subgroup items. And so we're still sorting through some of those details. And then the real team comes together as a whole and usually meets once a month. But revision request 554 is the performance-based accreditation. That's for conventional resources. It revises attachment AA, which is the general resource adequacy section of the SPP tariff. And then section 4 of the planning criteria to consider past performance, in other words, outages or availability of conventional resources. And the idea is to better align capacity accreditation to the capacity value provided by those resources. That would start with the 2025 summer season. This policy was one that was approved by the SPP working groups, stakeholder groups, RSC, and the board last July, I believed. And it was going to phase performance-based accreditation in over a period of time. With the FERC's decision rejecting the electric load carrying capability policy that SPP had advanced, SPP has gone back and they're working to align the performance-based accreditation methodology and the electric load carrying capability accreditation processes and those revision requests so that they can be filed hopefully simultaneously at FERC, so that FERC will see the whole picture of what SPP is doing, what their resource adequacy construct is for conventional and variable energy resources. So this particular revision request, which has undergone some revision from the policy a year ago, has received approval from the Supply Adequacy Working Group, and it was a majority of the working group. I think there were maybe one no vote and a couple of abstentions at the Supply Adequacy Working Group. It's working its way through the SPP stakeholder groups, and there's expected action by the RSC and SPP board of directors in October. COG currently has this revision request on our plates. We started reviewing. We had presentations on it at our August meeting. We ran out of time during that meeting to get all the way through it. We plan to take it up at our September meeting. We may vote on this at our September 8th or September 5th meeting. If there are COG members not quite comfortable with voting, since we'll be receiving some additional information and hear from the MMU on this one as well, then we'll likely have a special meeting later, a couple weeks later in September. This revision request is the companion to the performance-based accreditation. This is the electric load carrying capability. As I mentioned before, it too revises portions of attachment AA, and also as well as planning criteria and business practices that SPP has developed to address the issues raised in FERC's rejection. There have been some tweaks to this policy, which the board had previously approved. And they're not as, I don't think they are significant as material as some of the revisions that were made to the performance-based accreditation methodology. However, the RR as it was presented to FERC after last year's policy adoption did not include provisions for accrediting electric storage resources. That will now be, those have been developed and will now be folded into this revision request. So this will address wind, solar, and electric storage resources. This too received pretty broad support from the Supply Adequacy Working Group. And likewise, similarly, it's working its way through the stakeholder groups. And this too resides at COG for the moment, kind of on the same track as the performance-based accreditation. So hopefully we'll have a vote sometime in September, either on the 5th or later in the month. Some of the other policies that have kind of risen to the top in terms of real team activities have to do with resource retention. And then the outage policy that I mentioned previously when I was discussing the revision request for the winter season resource adequacy requirement. These are still being vetted within multiple groups. Resource retention in particular has, I mean, there's been an initiative within the IRATF process for quite some time, since the inception of the IRTF. It's so it's getting consideration from SOG, Market Working Group, as well as the REAL team. The Market Working Group is working on a compensation mechanism as a means of moving that forward. I think I think SPP staff has seen some movement towards retention just by natural way of the ongoing discussion about resource adequacy issues. So, but there's still a need to specifically address what policies, some of the policies that need to go forward. REAL team did meet last week and approve some of the recommendations that SPP staff has made. I can get the details of those to you a little bit later, but just know that they're undergoing quite a bit of work at this point in time. I'm not sure what I don't recall the time frame on the goal for these. The outage policy, again, multiple groups are taking a look at that. Both the Supply Adequacy Working Group, Market Working Group, Operating Reliability Working Group, and REAL. And we
Doesn't this really need to be on a fast track, though?
It is. They are. I
Okay,
can't.
all right. I mean, I just think this could go into Never Never Land real easily. If are there timeframes when each of these groups need to report in, so this just doesn't kind of wind its way leisurely?
It is. I'm what I'm trying to recall. I think resource retention might be they might be slated both. I'd have to look back at the REAL team slides, and they've kind of been moving a little bit in terms of priority dates. But I think outage policy is no later than January for Q1 of 2024. I think resource retention may be the same. It could be October of 2023. I'm trying to recall, and I can get you that information.
Yeah, I think if with all these different disparate but tied together, like resource retention, outage policy, if you put it at the top and then the different groups and the timelines, because they've all got to ultimately come together in some fashion to make.
And I do have a slide that reflects. Yeah, I have a slide from the REAL team materials, which I'll provide. I'll send those to you separately.
Okay. I appreciate when you do that, Sherry. That's real helpful for me to give an idea of those additional slides that you send. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, that's a shortcoming of this particular one. It's kind of, we've been kind of undergoing and reprioritizing. The outage policy was one that was not the top priority, and we've recently made it the top priority. And I have to double check the slides that I have to make sure they're the most current ones, because I think the slides that were presented at the July quarterly meetings might have been altered at our August meeting, and I don't recall right offhand, but I can certainly send the updated information to you.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think it gives us a flavor for the time frame of things, really what's happening in real time. And Commissioner French, I would turn to you. Are you satisfied that, I mean, I know there's multiple moving parts here, but are you satisfied and confident that we're addressing these items first in a holistic manner, but also in an acceptable time frame, so that the impacts, the positive impacts, are felt soon, and we're not subjecting ourselves to another round of, oh, hold your breath for another season of fill in the blank.
Well, so I did want to kind of make some editorial comments, because you're asking the right questions there. But I will start off that, we're not in a place where I feel like there's any guarantees. I don't think anybody feels that, we've got everything solved for the next year, 18 months or whatever. There's a lot of work left to do. There's probably resources to retain, resources to build. There's work to do. But as far as what's going on and whether things are moving fast, I wanted to make a couple points. I think the first point is this REAL team. all the concerns you're raising about whether we're doing things fast enough, whether we're prioritizing things correctly, that was the whole idea for creating that team, which includes a lot of state regulators. It includes a couple board members. It's got a much higher level of leadership and strategic view than a lot of the other working groups. And it was created to make sure we move as fast as possible on these issues, and to stay, I hate to say stay ahead of it, but stay as ahead of these issues as we can and prioritize them as quickly as we can. I also, wouldn't underestimate the impact that some of the items we are already processing have had on operations and planning for our utilities. The fact that we are quickly moving for much tougher accreditation methodologies, the fact that we have passed a winter season, an enforceable winter season planning reserve margin, those are big policy shifts that they will both have to comply with, but they also send a message that we're putting a big priority on resource adequacy as they plan operations in the future. So I think there are operational and planning changes occurring right now, looking at the fact that we as a stakeholder body and as regulators we are approving changes, and that we have things on the slate within the coming month to make changes. I think most of our entities, regulated entities in the region, they have to plan their operations and their investments, not months, but years ahead. And so I think they are taking note of, of all of this flurry of activity that's happened in the last, let's say, 18 months, and probably is going to continue for at least the next year. They're looking at this and realizing that the region and the policymakers within the region are taking this issue very seriously and are mandating concrete changes. And I know most of them are taking concrete steps to try to keep with the pace of these changes. And these are big changes. I mean, there definitely are concerns that it's difficult for them to move their ships as fast as these changes are coming. I would say that the pace of our reforms is definitely challenging them. My concern, I haven't heard a lot of concern that we're not moving fast enough. I mean, I think they're more concerned that how do they keep in compliance when we're making these big changes as fast as we are. But that's definitely not going to slow us down. We're moving as fast as we can. I mean, you know that resource adequacy has very quickly risen to the top of our list ever since Winter Storm Uri, Winter Storm Elliott, and then just seeing the operational challenges on a day-to-day basis of making sure we match up generation with supply. Everybody's laser focused on it. So,
well, I'm glad to hear that, because especially as I look at the weather forecast for this next week here in the summer, 6 months from now, we could be having a similar forecast. And that's what is almost terrifying. You're right. We have big ships we're trying to turn quickly, and that doesn't happen overnight. And my editorial comment is that FERC is not helping. I personally believe that some of the things that they're doing runs counter to what we're trying to do. And it really, I find it extremely disappointing and disheartening.
Yeah, I'll say I think FERC they have certainly some policy priorities, and they're probably a year or two behind the realities that are hitting some of the RTOs. And I expect some of these issues to be raised to a much higher level for them. And they're going to have to address some of these issues, because all of these policies that we're taking votes on now are ultimately going to go to them for votes. And so they're going to be faced with this reality. And we're not the only RTO. This is all the major planning regions have realized they need to be taking action on these types of items.
And you're right. And that should have been a wake-up call, but I feel that they're reading newspapers and news stories from 2019 and not 2010. I mean, they're not even, it's almost like they're not even on the same planet as we are, and don't really appreciate the challenges before us. So I appreciate SPP's response, and actually all the RTOs, their combined response. But thank you for kind of reassuring me that all forces are moving as quickly as possible to get these much needed adjustments made, understanding that everything is not perfect, and perfect is the destructor of good. And we can always make tweaks as we go along the way, but we definitely need to keep pushing forward. Thank you.
Well, you're speaking to one of the world's biggest pragmatists, so I appreciate your comments on perfect being the enemy of good. Sherry, I'll let you continue.
All right. IRETF is really kind of winding down its work. We have completed 21 of the 25 initiatives. Since the last quarterly update, we've approved the closure of an initiative that included winterization requirements because the generators are implementing 2019 NERC requirements in 2023 and newer 2021 NERC requirements by winter 2025-26. NERC issued some requirements specific to winterization, and with those requirements, our IRETF believed that it was appropriate to retire this particular initiative. We have, let's see if my next slide, I think my next slide identifies the ones that are left. It's quite possible that some of the remaining ones will get shifted to the REAL team. But here's what we have left and the timeline for it. The fuel supply availability and requirements and the need for dual fuel capability, that's something that'll probably be discussed. I think that was originally in August 2023, and it's been shifted to September. And here, this reflects the timing, hopefully, that we'll have and this is reference to basically RR 554 and RR 568. Hopefully by September, we'll have most of the working groups should be ready for MOPSI and MOPSI discussion in October, and then the board and RSC action later in the month in October. So I think their hope is to get it through all the working groups by the end of September. The price formation, we did have some education on this topic at, I believe it was the last REAL team meeting. So that was, I think, the first that we've really engaged on this issue. And so I think that one's going to shift to probably to REAL team, but we're looking at December 2023 on that one. And then the compensation mechanism that I referenced earlier as being part of the IRETF process. This is the REAL team did kind of endorse continued work in this direction. So I think this one is one that'll shift to REAL team as well. I believe that's it for that. For the joint stakeholder briefing, I just have given you a list of the presenters and the topics for discussion. I have, if you desire additional information about any of these, I've tried to highlight the ones that are ongoing issues at RSC and COG and RSC, and that are ongoing for update for continued work at RSC and the board. If you have any desire to see any of these materials, I'm happy to provide them. Like I said, I could excerpt the REAL team information here It provided the timelines that you're asking, but I think they've changed a little bit since that meeting. So I'll try to find a more current version of those to provide to you. Grid of the Future, there was a report that was approved earlier this year. It's basically trying to establish a strategic direction for several areas of SPP's mission. And there, so that is ongoing. It covers a lot of different, I think there are like 5 different subject areas. If you desire additional information, I think I might have provided a link to the report to you in the past. Transmission planning update, and then the holistic integrate, those are the last 4 that are there. Transmission planning, holistic tariff team, those are kind of standing update issues for the joint stakeholder briefing. I don't know that there's anything in particular note on any of those, but I'm happy to delve into that further with you if you wish. The SPP Board of Directors and Members Committee meeting, this is what they approved, what the board approved. They approved the RSC's recommendation on revision request 549, as well as the HIT M1 congestion hedging improvements. They approved the RTO West budget of nearly $40 million. They approved the Markets Plus Phase 1 budget. I'm sorry, I don't have a dollar figure there. I'll have to do a little digging to find what that dollar amount is. There was a 20-year assessment report. I think those are done. Is it once every 5 years that they do a 20-year assessment? And so the board reviewed this report, and there was an addendum. I think there was perhaps a project that had been withdrawn that affected the overall report, and they wanted to make sure that that addendum was approved. That had been a consent agenda item that got pulled from the consent agenda. Revision request 565. It has to do with FERC Order 881 compliance by SPP. That has to do with ambient adjusted ratings for transmission lines. And so those were all approved.
So what are they spending 40 million on the RTO West? What is that?
Oh, I don't know
Yeah,
how prepared
That's all right.
I don't know. I can get you the details of that.
That just sounds like a new item that I'm
They've
not.
been working on RTO West, you know, developing that, and they have letters of commitment from several of the utilities in what would be RTO West.
Yeah,
And I think there are a couple of outstanding that they're WAPA related, and they have to do a public notice process on their and comment period to comply with federal requirements that they have. And so I think they're awaiting letters of commitment, but I think this is a budget to actually have in place for when all the commitments are made and the RTO West is up and running.
so it's commitments by utilities
Yes,
to join.
right.
Okay.
And at this last RSC meeting, we did have a couple of commissioners from states who may be joining. We had
Lamar from Utah and Mary Throne from Wyoming.
right.
Mary from Wyoming. Who else? I'm sorry, Commissioner French. We don't get the first few seconds of your dialogue.
Thad LeVar from Utah.
Okay. That's
So
interesting.
Yeah, to the extent that we do have new states that are interested in, to the extent that these utilities join and new states coming in, we'll probably have we'll probably need to make some bylaw changes to the regional state committee bylaws to figure out how the RSC will operate with additional commissioners coming in, and particularly those in the Western Interconnection, because there may be a need to vote separately on some issues. So, but that hasn't been determined as yet, so.
All right, thank you.
Uh-huh.
Sherry, if I could, just Dwight.
Sure.
Hey, good
Good
morning,
morning.
starters. Thank you once again for doing this. You do an excellent job, of course. I'm looking down. I'm going to direct the question to you because you're our presenter, but I think it's quite possible that Andrea may have some more information on this than you. And I don't mean I'm not trying to mousetrap you here by the question. But if we go down to the bullet there that has to do with the 2022 20-year assessment report.
Right.
Next to the last there. I've seen that report. I've reviewed it. And one part of it had a planning horizon for the retirement of all fossil generation, as I read it anyway, of 20 years out. That was one of the planning horizon options that was present there. Was there any action taken on the planning aspects of that 20-year assessment report? You know?
Well, the board endorsed the report by voting on it. They did endorse the report, and they typically address several different futures. And my guess is that that's a particular future that they're addressing. And I will certainly let Commissioner French weigh in to the extent he has any additional information to add.
Yeah, I almost weighed in on the last slide because I think that was actually also part of the joint stakeholder briefing, and I wanted to make sure it got highlighted. Just to back up a little bit, as Sherry said, the 20-year assessment is sort of their long-term assessment. They do it every 5 years. And for this one, they had 4 different, they call them futures, but they're just 4 different scenarios of maybe what the world could look like in the future. They have sort of a business as usual. And then, it varies to, I think maybe the one you're referencing is sort of their more extreme, like, decarbonization, quicker energy transition, maybe electric vehicles. So it's their more extreme scenario. And then, so you get kind of different portfolios of projects based on what the different scenarios look like. I think one thing that's important to remember is that these 20-year, and it's really important, these 20-year assessments are really more of a strategic tool for informational purposes, to give us some insight into maybe what we might see coming, but they don't identify projects for construction coming out of them. They do generally identify what different portfolios could look like, but they don't ever issue sort of a notice to construct a line out of these. And so what happened is the board of directors basically votes to accept the 20-year report, but they're not voting to approve any particular project. They're accepting that assessment. I thought one interesting thing, and I know David Kelly, the head of engineering and transmission planning at SPP, called this out. It was sort of interesting that even given a pretty broad range of scenarios, ranging from what we called sort of our business as usual to that very more aggressive case, I think a lot of people were surprised that the portfolios coming out over 20 years were all pretty similar, and all pretty, actually, I view it as good news that they were fairly limited, that the transmission build out necessary to meet a wide range of different futures is not maybe as big and robust as what we see over in like the MISO region, where they're planning sort of these giant tens of billions of dollar build outs. I'm doing this from memory, but I think there were a couple large 345 kV needs sort of in the central Kansas area going down into the eastern Oklahoma area. in the various scenarios. But that's kind of my recollection of the process. Commissioner Keen, I don't know if I answered your question in there, but I do think it was really important to call out the long-term assessment and the fact that it's a strategic tool. It's not necessarily a tool to build projects out of.
Now, Commissioner French, I think that you've really helped a lot. You provide some contextual reference, which is really important, and it's very helpful. When I was seeing particularly the more aggressive projections and planning goals, I guess, in terms of within the parameter of the assessment report, I was concerned about a couple of things. One is, how in the world can that possibly be reconciled, such an aggressive approach, with some of the resource adequacy issues that are front and center right now, and will probably become more intensely considered and debated as time goes on. And then secondly, how in the world can that be reconciled with the August 8th SPP letter, and then something, an event they joined in with other RTOs to criticize the aspects of, I'll be generous here, aspects of the EPA's proposed coal plant new rules. So I was just concerned about reconciling all these things, and you've helped. I appreciate the perspective you've provided. That was it, Sherry, for me.
All right, I will proceed to the next slide. This just references the consent agenda items that were approved. They had some strategic planning committee appointments to that committee, adjusted their pension contribution levels. There was a sponsored upgrade that they approved, and there was a withdrawal of a notice to construct. And let's see. So that brings me to the FERC update. As I believe you're aware, the HIT C2 cost allocation waiver Sunflower had submitted an application which was had gone through the COG process for consideration, and there would have been a COG recommendation to the RSC on this particular issue. However, FERC on July 13th reversed its previous approval of the HIT C2 waiver process and declared SPP's compliance filing moot, which basically mooted the COG's recommendation to the RSC. Since then, Sunflower, Midwest Energy, KEPCO, and Basin Electric have jointly filed a request for rehearing at FERC that was filed on August 14th. This issue now resides back within COG. We are evaluating what our options might be to provide some direction to the RSC. So we expect to take that up at our September meeting. We had some discussion about it at our August meeting on August the 8th. Did a number of straw polls trying to winnow our options down. Whether what is there a recommendation to suggest that SPP just refile the tariff filing with addressing the FERC concerns. Are there other avenues to pursue other than that one? What are they? That type of thing. So we're kind of have ongoing discussions related to how to handle HIT C2 moving forward. There was also I think this is the only other update I have. There was a Federal Power Act Section 206 complaint that challenged SPP's resource adequacy construct that was filed on February 10th. And there was a desire for the PRM, the planning reserve margin, to be explicitly stated, included within the tariff. FERC denied the complaint on May 3rd, and there has since been an appeal filed, and it's pending in the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals.
Sherry, if I could, pardon the interruption again, go back 2 slides if you would to the one.
Okay.
Yeah, that one again. And I think your update here with respect to the post July 13th order events that are taking place and are transpiring even beyond the purview of the request for rehearing that these various entities have filed with FERC. That's very helpful. I'd have to kind of harken back to the concern that I believe the chair expressed about FERC. I think this raised a level of concern, certainly within Kansas, that's pretty widespread about the harmful effects. I'll editorialize a little bit here and take a little license doing it. The harmful effects that this order causes, many of the consequences that arise as a result of this order are not helpful. And it's very harmful, I think, especially toward sunflower and Midwest. And I think we rightfully had the concern we did in encouraging our staff to try to work with them to fashion whatever future alternatives we may be able to work with on them too. So anyway, thank you for highlighting that, Jerry. That's it for me.
Okay. JTIQ update. I believe this is my last slide. This joint application was filed by SPP and MISO May 19th. It remains under consideration by DOE. We did learn, I think it was in June, that the cost estimates that were included within that application were over and above what the estimates had been when this was going through the SPP kind of approval process, endorsement process. When this was coming through before COG and RSC, I think with the original portfolio, the estimated costs were $1.06 billion. The estimates that are in the actual application are $1.86 billion. And there was there are various reasons that those estimates are higher. These were actual, I mean, I think the preliminary ones were kind of conceptual costs. These are actually developed by the transmission owners who would be building these projects. They were trying to make sure that those costs were truly representative of what they expect those costs to be, and also to build in some consideration for some of the reporting requirements that go along with DOE oversight of such funding matters. And so at this point, the most recent update I have is just that SPP and MISO are working on several revisions that they need to make to their joint operating agreement. I think they've made their first stab at those changes and they're working on editing those. They each have to make tariff revisions to their respective tariffs. So those will come forward with revision request language at SPP to several different portions of the SPP tariff, including a new tariff provision that relates directly to JTIQ projects. So that work is underway. I'm not certain what the timeline is on that. I think SPP and MISO are hoping to submit their tariff revisions at roughly the same time. I'm not sure on the MISO side what their time frame, what that lift looks like for them. On the SPP side, I think the SPP staff feels like they're making pretty good progress on those revisions. We might see something in the October timeframe. I'm not sure. So, and let's see if that is, in fact, yes, that was my last substantive slide. So are there any other questions, requests? Oh, I did send the materials to you. There is a resource adequacy workshop that SPP is hosting in Dallas on September the 7th. I provided that agenda for your review. If you need any assistance in registering to attend, I'm happy to help in whatever way that I can, as well as for other SPP or KCC staff members who might wish to attend all or part of that summit.
Very good. Thank you, Sherry. I appreciate your update. These are really beneficial for us and keeping us apprised of all SPP activities. And as there's so many things going on, I'll turn to commissioners for final comments or questions.
None for me. No, yeah, thank you. None for me. Thank you very much again, Sherry. These are incredibly helpful briefings that you provide to us, and we're grateful for your work.
Thank you, Commissioner King. Commissioner French.
Any questions? Sherry, thanks so much for the update. It is definitely an understatement to say there's a lot going on. It's a lot of work to stay on top of this. It's a lot of time for all of us just sitting in the various meetings. You could spend pretty much every moment of every day sitting in working group meetings and taking notes and participating in the stakeholder process. And I think we as a state do as good a job as anybody to be involved in that process and protect our ratepayers and our citizens. So thank you so much for your work, Sherry.
And I would agree that we do have an element of as we are a member, to safeguard, quote, our territorial interests. And they are diverse, but also, but at the same time, they're not. So I appreciate the work that staff does and that you perform, Commissioner French. Also, I note that you are on a panel for this upcoming resource advisory meeting. Is this one that, I mean, what's the intent? Is this is sponsored by SPP? So is this more of an informative, or what is the intent of the meeting?
I think it is informative for maybe our stakeholders and maybe a broader array of stakeholders than those that get to participate in meetings every day. I mean, I will note, I think the invitation went out to every single commissioner within the footprint, and it's certainly an invitation to all staff members within the footprint. I also think, you can see that there's some stakeholders coming from other regions around the country. We have the head of NERC coming. Commissioner Christie is going to be coming from FERC. We've got some national sort of consulting groups or power industry groups coming. And this is just my take, but I think this is the feedback that the Southwest Power Pool has gotten from its state regulators and from its members is that resource adequacy is at the top of the list, and it's going to be at the top of the list. And I think this is a response to that, to help elevate it in the public consciousness and to make sure that everybody is aware of how important this is. So, I think it is a broad informational and awareness campaign to try to raise the level of prominence of this issue, but also to invite in some other perspectives and get some cross-pollination going with neighboring regions and the governmental entities like FERC and NERC.
Yeah, I do believe that bringing in the federal component of what we do is extremely valid and important, as this affects us nationwide. Okay. Any other comments or questions? If not, I will entertain a motion to adjourn, and I'm looking at Commissioner French for that. There is a motion and a second. Commissioner Keen.
Second.
Okay. All those in favor, please vote aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone, for your time today. Be safe, be cool.